I was jolted out of sleep when my 5-year-old son, Kevin, jumped on top of me. I let out a little yelp, both from the shock and of the impact of being ripped out of a deep sleep. A little disorientated, it took me a few moments to figure out what was going on. Now jumping up and down on the bed, Kevin yelled, "Fuzzy came again! Fuzzy came again!" I sighed, rubbed my eyes and checked the clock. It wasn't even 6 o'clock in the morning yet. Kevin continued to jump ecstatically around the bed. By now, my wife was awake and very cranky. She looked over to the clock and, seeing the time, released a frustrating moan. "Geez, kid, can't you wait until at least 6? She murmured sleepily. She, too, had been sleeping soundly. "Fuzzy came again. I told you he would." Kevin was too excited to care what time it was. It would have been 1 in the morning for all he cared. "He's back! He's back!" Fuzzy, as he called him, was what we assumed was Kevin's imaginary friend. He described him as a fuzzy, colourful creature that arrived in a magical mist through his window every night. And they played together. Kevin claimed that he could change colours and even shape, but he was always fuzzy. My wife and I both dismissed this as an imaginary friend phase, as we lived in a somewhat rural area outside of a minor city, and there was no one around for him to play with. Every morning, he would tell us what he did with Fuzzy last night. His stories would include making puzzles, reading books, jumping about and cuddling. The one thing that was weird though, was the fact that Kevin had, at first, told us that Fuzzy didn't want us to know about his nightly visits. A bit put off at that at first, I soon disregarded this as merely a child's need to feel special because he had a secret. Sometimes I felt the need to check on Kevin at night, just to make sure everything was alright. The main reason I didn't was because Kevin was a very light sleeper, in contrast to me and my wife, who were very heavy sleepers, and I didn't want to run the risk of waking him up. Kevin had stopped talking about Fuzzy a couple of months back, so we just assumed that he had grown out of it. I didn't see anything wrong with Kevin bringing Fuzzy back. I was happy as long as he was happy. I worked at home. My wife worked in the city and was pretty much gone all day, so I cared for Kevin as he wasn't in school yet. It did get rather annoying after a while, constantly being bombarded with stories of Fuzzy all day. I smiled at Kevin's enthusiasm, but deep down, I felt a sense of dread welling up at the idea of Fuzzy returning. I got up out of bed and left the room, leaving my wife to deal with Kevin, and went downstairs. While making breakfast, I decided to check the newspaper. A car crash on the interstate and nobody was found. A rich lady donated some money to the state for park improvements or something, claiming the current state was simply unacceptable. There was a short editorial on why kids are doing poorly in school, and parenting suggestions on the topic. An old man accused of pedophilia and using hallucinogenics and other drugs to lure children, arrested 3 months ago, was released from jail, as there was not enough incriminating evidence. There was some sports stuff too, but I didn't bother checking that as I was never really into sports. Later that day, I was in Kevin's room cleaning up. It smelled funny in his room. In fact, the last time I remember it smelling this way was the last time Kevin was talking about Fuzzy. I thought about it for a moment, but decided to just dismiss it as a fermented body odour from him jumping around in his bed with his imaginary friend. I decided to open a window, as it was giving me a headache. Looking out, I saw Kevin in the yard playing with some of his toys. It had rained last night and the ground was soft and muddy, so I made sure to warn him not to go near the mud. I lowered my head to withdraw back into the room, but noticed something on the ground beneath the window. 2 holes, about a foot or so apart. They weren't that big, so I wasn't too concerned. It just bugged me, as I couldn't think of anything that might have made them. I looked up to ask Kevin if he knew what they were. He might have made them. He had moved somewhere else though, and I didn't feel like chasing him down to ask him something so menial. The next day, I was wiping down a window in the dining room which led directly below Kevin's room. The 2 holes caught my eye again. However, this time, they were even bigger than before. At dinner, I decided to ask Kevin if he had been digging in the backyard. He said no, so I figured it must have been an animal or something. That evening, something else occurred to me. I found Kevin in the living room. "Hey Kevin," I asked. "Why does Fuzzy only come out at night? You seem bored lately and you never play with him during the daytime." He simply shrugged. "I don't know," he replied. "He just doesn't." This was when things started to feel a bit off. It had never occurred to me before that Kevin didn't play with Fuzzy during the daytime. It was probably just his way of keeping Fuzzy in a more realistic light. If he brought Fuzzy out to show him to us, he would see that we clearly didn't believe in the fluffy piece of air next to him. Yeah, that's it. That's why. Nothing much happened for the next week or so. My wife and I went to bed 10 o'clock sharp, as usual. We let Kevin stay up later if he wanted to, so he could play with his imaginary friend. We didn't mind the noise he made. In fact, if we were asleep, we didn't hear it at all. Hell, a train couldn't wake us up once we hit deep sleep. Every night, Kevin would say something different about Fuzzy. One night, he apparently brought a cookie, which I strongly suspect he stole from the cookie jar. And another night they flew through the clouds on Fuzzy's back. We were happy that our child's imagination was healthy, but that feeling that something was slightly off never went away. Next week, I had to start putting Kevin to bed at the same time we went to bed, and later on, earlier than us. School was coming up, and I wanted him to be on a normal biorhythm so that he wouldn't wake us up early. But of course, this disrupted his Fuzzy schedule, and he would not go to bed without a fight. As days passed, it was becoming visibly obvious that he was not going to sleep when he was supposed to, and instead of probably getting up after we fell asleep, dark circles under his eyes formed. He was whinier than ever, and almost impossible to deal with, leaving me utterly exhausted every day. Needless to say, I had no trouble falling asleep that week. I was getting sick of my authority being undermined, so I decided to stay up late one night in order to catch him in the act. I went to bed as normal, got up and moved to a chair, and after a 30-minute period of sitting there, I began to doze off. I decided I would need some help in the stakeout. I crept downstairs to make a quick batch of coffee. That feeling that something was wrong never alleviated itself. It felt like my father's instinct was going off, but I didn't know why. I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee for what seemed to be ages. Frequently glancing at the clock didn't help. I spent most of the time reading the newspaper, and every time I began to doze off, I got more coffee. Accustomed to the silence, I jumped a little when I heard a little thump coming from upstairs. The clock read 12:30. I had no idea Kevin had the capacity to wait more than 3 hours just for a stupid imaginary friend. I quietly set my stuff down on the kitchen table and tiptoed to the stairs. I made sure to avoid the creaky steps as I slowly ascended into the darkness of the second floor. Just as I reached the top step, I heard Kevin's voice from down the hallway. "Fuzzy!" It was now blindingly obvious that Kevin was awake. I heard another thump come from Kevin's room as I slowly made my way down the hallway. I thought about calling out his name and scolding him right then, but decided against it, as it would only serve to alert him to my presence and allow him to retreat under the covers and pretend he was asleep. The feeling that something was wrong grew from minor to almost unbearable. A soft hissing noise come from his room was now within earshot. I reached the door, gulping. I silently gripped the handle, turned it, and pushed inward. As I was opening the door, Kevin's bedroom window came into view. It was wide open, and in it a ladder. I flung the door wide open and nearly fainted. There, in the middle of the room, was an incredibly hairy, naked old man wearing a gas mask. He was feeding hallucinogenic gas up Kevin's nose. You see, I'm a simple college student living alone in an apartment. I was very enthusiastic about the release of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver here in the States. I've purposely locked myself out of all media and internet, aside for school purposes. That means no 4chan, no Vboard, no Bulbapedia, etc. As I was busy with the school year and being poor at the time, I wasn't able to buy Soul Silver on its launch date. After my school year ended, I ordered Soul Silver on Amazon. However, it would take a week for it to arrive. I decided that during that time, I would replay my Crystal version on my Game Boy Color. However, I realised that long ago, my mum threw it away because I told her the save went dead, and I was very upset about it then. She also threw away my silver version, so all I have is my Game Boy Color. As such, I set out to GameStop and bought a used silver version, as it's the only Pokemon game left they had for Game Boy Color. $10, fairly cheap. I went home and started it up for a nostalgia trip. However, that's where things started getting bizarre. And most likely the reason you're listening to this. The Game Freak logo started up as normal, but it just froze there. I thought the cart was just errored or something, so I turned it off and on, and the same thing happened. I tried pressing A and start over and over, and all of the buttons. Eventually, the logo vanished, and there was a black screen for about 5 seconds. Suddenly, rather than going to the usual menu screen, I was already in the game in a previous saved file, which was odd as I was expecting all of these cards to have been wiped by the poor battery. Either way, I wasn't complaining, as I would have chosen the continue option just to see what the previous guy did anyways. First off, I checked the trainer information. His name was just ... He didn't have much originality. I checked his profile, and apparently he had 999 hours put into the game, with all 16 badges, 99,999.9 poker dollars, and all the 251 Pokemon in the Pokedex. Seeing as he apparently had Mew and Celebi logged also, I'm guessing he used a Game Genie, or was a really hardcore Pokemon player back then. I checked his Pokemon, just to see what badass team he had. To my surprise, I saw 5 unknowns, and a 6th Pokemon named Hurry. I'm thinking that this must be some cruel joke by the person who last played the game, but I decided to check the profiles of the Pokemon anyways. As expected, there were different letters of unknown, all level 5. I was a bit shaky with my unknown alphabet at the time, but I identified the word, spelled out to be leave. As for the 6th Pokemon, it turned out to be a Cyndaquil. Mind you, this is before there were individualized Pokemon icons. The Cyndaquil looked normal, but it was only level 5, with only 1 HP left, with only 2 attacks, Leer and Flash. I don't know why they named him Hurry, but at the time, I just disregarded it. The most eerie thing was that despite my volume being max, none of the Pokemon had said the usual cries. Just pure silence. Having enough of the team, I closed it. I was parked at what appears to be a room inside the Bellsprout Tower. However, for some reason, there were no NPCs around. Even more eerie was that the pillar in the middle didn't move at all, as if just leaning on its side. There was no music at all, and there were no exit or ladders. Or at least I thought there wasn't. I walked around for a few minutes, but can't seem to find a way out. This was certainly not a room I've been in the Bellsprout Tower before. I tried checking my items for an escape rope, but the bag was completely empty. There wasn't any wild Pokemon either. Finally, I've managed to find a ladder, which turned out to be behind the pillar. The screen turned black, and the music finally started playing. I had a sudden chill, as I recognised the melody I heard to be the same theme you hear when you listen to the radio at the Alpha Ruins where the unknowns are. I immediately realised that it wasn't a loading transition, but rather I was in a dark room and would need flash. Before I took care of that though, I immediately checked my poker gear to change the radio to something more pleasant. But it turns out there was no radio card, or even a phone, nor time cards. There was only a map card in which Gold ... from earlier was just walking in the midst of black. I recall that Cyndaquil has flash, so I turned off my poker gear and made Cyndaquil use flash. I didn't see any message saying hurry used flash or anything like that. The room just became lit, just like that, and I soon regretted it. The room was a chilling blood red, with a linear grey path heading south. The ladder I used to go up and down was not there at all. I had no choice but to head south. The screen got darker every 20 steps I made. Until I finally made it to the end, which appears to be a sign. I read the sign, which said, "Turn back now." Suddenly, I was asked to answer yes or no, but there was no question asked. I chose yes, as I do not know what it was asking, and the screen went black again, making a ladder climb sound. The unknown radio music stopped, and in a few seconds was replaced with the not as creepy poker flute radio music. I was in another dark room, but I held my breath and used flash again. Suddenly it said, "Hurry has fainted," which was odd, since I recall that there was no status condition like poison on him, and I clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly, and suddenly he's no longer in my party. In fact, after a bit of investigating, none of my Pokemon are there, but instead replaced with level 10 unknown. I did the same thing as before, and spelled out the unknown. My then team of unknown spelled, "He died." Either way, after that creepy change, the room was lit to reveal myself in a very small room that appears to be only 4 squares big. The walls of that room were big grey bricks, as if I was inside something that was hollowed out. Outside that room appears to be a bunch of graves, similar to the one in Pokemon Red and Blue. I've walked around that small room and pressed A, but nothing happened. I've already concluded that this was clearly a hacked game, and some sadistic person sold it to GameStop. However, my curiosity kept me going. I checked the trainer profile of ... again, only to find out that the sprite of Gold was missing his arms. He also seems to appear less smug, but rather seems more sad and empty in a way that I do not know how to describe. For some reason, it also now said that he had 24 badges, which was clearly impossible. After a few minutes of aimlessly wondering, my character suddenly spun and did the escape rope spinning animation. Instead of flying up though, my character spun downwards, slowly, as if sinking. After that screen, the music stopped. After finally landing, the overworld sprite of gold is coloured differently now. Instead of the usual red colour he dons, he appeared completely white now, including his skin. It's as if he came straight from the colourless Game Boy games, replaced into a coloured background of the Game Boy Color. I checked his profile, and now, while now is as white as his overworld sprite, he lost his legs, and what appears to be bloody tears from his eyes. It also says he has 32 badges, which now starts to disturb me, as this change of number seems to represent something important. I also checked my Pokemon, which this time contains 5 unknowns, and a level 100 Celebi without a nickname. The unknown are this time leveled 15, and spelling out dying. I checked the Celebi's profile. It was a shiny Celebi, except there was only half of the sprite. 1 arm, 1 leg, 1 eye, and it only had 1 attack. Perish Song. The area I was in itself was the Sprout Tower, with the immobile pillar as before, except everything is apparently red now. I walked north for what felt like forever. Eventually, I encountered some generic men and women NPCs. They were all lined up to the side, just facing along the slantish pillar in the middle. They were also white, and nothing happened when I tried to speak to them. I kept on going north until eventually the pillar finally appears chopped off, with the transparent red in that spot. I went up to red, and without even pressing A, I was suddenly engaged in a battle. The music starts again, which sounds like the unknown radio music again, but played backwards. Gold's battle sprite matches his front one with the bloody eyes, white skin, and lack of arms. Gold's battle back sprite matches his front one with the bloody eyes, white skin, and lack of arms, while Red sprite was the same as before in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, except transparent. The text simply said, "Wants the battle," as if he has no name, and both of us only have 1 Pokemon each, which is weird as I swore I had 6 with the unknowns. My Celebi came out, conveniently with half a sprite, for the back sprite also. The shiny sound and animation was different as the sounds it made sound like multiple screech attacks used consecutively. Red sent out a seemingly normal male Pikachu, except he's level 255 and his sprite seems sad and has tears in his eyes. Rather than the usual fight, item, Pokemon run menu, I was only given the option to use attacks. Since Celebi only had one, I chose it. Naturally, since Pikachu was level 255, he went first. Pikachu used Curse, lowering his speed and increasing his other stats. I'm not even sure if Pikachu could use Curse. Celebi used Perisong. In 3 turns, both Pokemon get KO'd. Not like I have a choice. At this point, I didn't even go back into the fight menu, as the battle just continued without me. Also note, there were no animations at all for some reason. Pikachu used Flail, which didn't do much damage despite his level, and boost as his health was maxed. Celebi used Perisong. Nothing happens as it was already used. Pikachu used Frustration, which did a ton of damage, knocking Celebi to less than 10 HP. Celebi used Pain Split, which surprised me as Celebi didn't even have that attack in the first place. Now Celebi and Pikachu have about 150 HP. Pikachu used Mean Look. Not like that did anything. As expected, due to the effects of Perisong, my Celebi fainted. Except in the text it said, Celebi has died. Instead of the ordinary drop-off screen animation, the Celebi back sprite just vanished. For some reason, the Pikachu was still up, even with the Perisong, and it didn't count as my loss. Pikachu used one more different attack beyond the 5 attack limit. Pikachu used Destiny Bond. Afterwards, it said Pikachu has died, with a slow fade out animation. Apparently I was the winner, as the transparent red sprite showed up and said, ... At that point, I just freaked out, as the transparent red sprite was suddenly beheaded, leaving nothing but his transparent body. The battle then ended at that point and faded out along with the music. I'm back in the overworld, with another change to Gold Sprite. He is now as transparent as Red's overworld sprite. I quickly checked Gold's profile, where this time, the only thing remains of him is his head, with a transparent skin. The head was zoomed in a bit, showing black void in his eyes. It now stated that he had 40 badges, and I backed out and checked my Pokemon. They were all level 20 shiny unknown, which spelled out no more. I was at what I now know is next to the end. There was apparently no music playing, but for some reason I felt like something was there that could be heard. I was back in New Barktown. Maybe finally I get to play this game properly. But who am I kidding? I knew that sadistic person must have done something. I walked around the room to interact with things, as I'm a bit afraid to go down the stairs and see what was awaiting down there. Note I said walked, as while the background was moving, Gold Sprite was not moving his transparent limbs at all while doing so, just floating like those ghosts you see in Diamond and Pearl. As expected, the radio, computer, and TV didn't work, so I had no choice but to go downstairs. I ended up in the same lower level room of my house. Everything appears normal, except Mom isn't home. After failing to interact with anything in this room, I decided to go outside. To my surprise, that door leading outside at the south didn't work, and instead, I just walked straight through it to avoid. I continued moving south to see what the hell was going on. My house vanishes as I head south into the void. It was creepy as when I entered the void. The outline on Gold Sprite turned white to contrast the pitch black. Eventually, I reached the white area, and Gold Sprite turned black and transparent again. I continued south, without thinking of stopping at all. After a long trek south, I finally encountered something. It was Gold's regular sprite. I tried to talk to it. He said, "Goodbye, forever," and vanished. As that happened, it said, "????, use nightmare," which at that point, I would not deny that being possible. Gold did another escape rope animation, spinning slowly downwards like before. I'm now back into that small, hollowed out room surrounded by graves earlier. Or at least I say I was back there, as there was no sprite anymore. I tried to walk around, but nothing moved. Not even wall bumping noise. I checked my trainer's profile, with absolutely no Gold Sprite left. It said I have 0 badges, and all the pictures of the Johto gym leaders at the bottom were replaced with skulls. I checked my Pokemon, which were all level 25 unknown. As expected, it spelled out a phrase that I dared to read. I'm dead. As soon as I went back to the overworld, the room I was in was then covered with the same blocks as the walls. I then figured out what exactly that room was when the final text said R.I.P. ... That room was a big grave, surrounded by other graves. Gold has already been dead. He died, presumably, a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempts at becoming a Pokemon master, was still unable to avoid the inevitability fate of death, and his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. I was unable to escape from that text, no matter what I pressed. I tried resetting the game, and the same thing happened, at which I finally decided to give up on that horrible nightmare. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick Unknown the same way again. They say that only the first generation have folk tales and legends, but the second generation have shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually enjoyed Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink what that rigged game has told me. Does anyone remember an old PC game from the early 1990s called Mr. Mix? It's mainly a typing game, similar to Mario Teaches Typing, where you have to type words into a box and make a chef, the titular Mr. Mix, put ingredients into a bowl. Unlike most typing games, however, this game is notorious for having an insane difficulty curve. The game has a words per minute requirement for each level, being as low as 10 on level 1 and as high as 85 on the third. By level 5, the requirement reaches over 500, effectively making it impossible to proceed any further. One of the main things that people noticed about this game immediately was the background music. The music on the first level was an unsettling pattern of growls. They got progressively louder as the level went on, often causing damage to early computer speakers that were not designed to handle extremely high volumes of sound. The second level had no music at all, and the third had what sounded like an extremely low quality recording of a hairdryer playing in the background. The remaining 2 levels had an extremely loud, high-pitched ringing throughout the level that caused severe eardrum damage to those who managed to get that far. Another rather disturbing aspect of the game was the design of Mr. Mix himself. He was a large, round-faced, overweight man with large, beady eyes and red spots on his cheeks. Most children who play the game reported having vivid nightmares of Mr. Mix speaking to them in a quiet, raspy voice and threatening them to keep quiet about something. However, none of them could remember exactly what that was. One psychologist who saw many of these children reported being disturbed by the sheer amount of terror on the faces of the children as they recounted the details of the nightmare. Many of the children broke down into tears in the process, begging for their parents to save them. However, no direct relationship to the game itself could be determined by these few cases, as not all the children suffered the same adverse effects. For obvious reasons, this game did not sell very well. It remained in relative obscurity until a few years ago, when PC hackers got a hold of a ROM of the game and started digging through it. Using memory hacking software, they managed to crack the game's code and bypass the impossible 5th level. What they found, however, was extremely disturbing and caused many of them to quit their expedition altogether. According to the reports these hackers left behind, the game behaves very strangely in the 5th level if bypassed. The game crashes violently and closes, writing a bunch of files to the user system 32 directory to the point that the RAM was almost completely filled. These files are reportedly pictures of people with horribly deformed faces, appearing to scream in pain and agony, with their eyes appearing to be bleeding from their tear ducts, and their outer layer of skin torn clean off in multiple places. If the user attempts to delete these files, the computer will violently crash and blue screen, causing permanent, irreparable damage to the user's hard drive. The hackers found that this was caused by a lone byte in the game's ROM that triggered when the 5th level was completed. By removing this byte, they were able to proceed to the 6th and final level. Unfortunately, all of the original hackers declined to discuss what they saw in the final level. All of them became extremely paranoid and reclusive, refusing to talk about anything related to the game and showing astonishingly extreme symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of them ceased to be able to form coherent sentences within a week, and within a month, all of them went missing. All remaining copies of the game were destroyed. To this day, no one knows what was in that game that caused them so much psychological damage. Maybe it's better that way. 2 years after this incident, a man was arrested trying to kidnap an 8-year-old girl from a grocery store. Through DNA and fingerprint analysis, the man was identified as one of the original hackers who viewed the final level of the game. He was wearing a white chef's hat and had a look of unspeakable malice and insanity on his face. When interrogated, the man would only say one thing: "I'm Mr. Mix. Shh." Some people might recall some momentary buzz caused a couple of years ago by a particularly odd Morrowind mod. The file name was jvk1166z.esp. It was never posted on any of the larger Elder Scrolls communities, usually just smaller boards and role-playing groups. I know in a few cases, rather than being posted, it was sent via PM or email to a chosen few. It was only up for a few days, to the best of my knowledge. It caused a buzz because it was a virus, or seemed to be. If you tried to load the game with the mod active, it would hang the initial load screen for a full half an hour and then crash to the desktop. If you let it get that far, your install of Morrowind, along with any save files you had, would become completely corrupted. Nobody could figure out what the mod was trying to do since it couldn't be opened in the construction set. Eventually, warnings were distributed not to use it if you found it, and things died down. About a year later, in a mod board I frequently use, some people popped up with the mod again. He said he was PM'd by a lurker who deleted his account immediately after sending. He also said that the person advised him to try play the mod through DOSBox. For some reason this worked, sort of. The game was a bit laggy and you couldn't get into options, load game, the console, or really anything else other than the game itself. The quick save and quick load hot buttons worked, but that was it. And the quick save file seemed to be just part of the game file, so you couldn't get at it anymore. Some speculated that the changed game used an older graphics renderer, making DOSBox necessary, but it didn't look any different. This part I can speak about from personal experience. When you start a new game in JVK, as the board came to call it, once you left the start bit in the census office and came into the proper game, the first thing you notice is that the prophecy has been severed box pops up. This is because every single NPC having to do the main quest is dead, with the sole exception of Yagun Bargon, the last of the Dwemer. Their corpses never despawned, so you can go and check on all of them. In effect, you begin in a world that's doomed to start with. The second thing you notice is that you're losing health. It's only a bit, but it keeps happening, a little bit at a time. The longer you stay in one place, the quicker it seems to occur. If you let this health loss kill you, you'll find the cause. A figure we came to call the Assassin, because he seems to wear retextured version of the Dark Brotherhood armor from Tribunal, even though the expansions don't work in JVK. It's all black, completely untextured, like he's just a hole in space. The way he moves, he gave me quite a start, the first time I saw him scuttling around my dead body. He crawls inhumanly on his hands and feet, his arms and legs splayed out like a spider. You'd usually only see him after death, crawling around and over your body just before the reload box popped up. Occasionally, you could catch a glimpse of him darting around in the corner or crawling on a wall or ceiling. It made the game very difficult to play at night. Other than that, the only noticeable difference is that at night, at random intervals, every NPC in the game will go outside for a few minutes. During this time, the only thing they will say when hailed is, "Watch the sky." Once they return to the normal behaviour, they act like normal though. After a while, a player on the board discovered a new NPC named Tierras, a male Dunmer in the temple at Ghostgate. Two things are notable about this NPC. First is his robe, a unique article of clothing that was lovingly rendered with twinkling stars all across it, looking like a torn off chunk of the night sky. The second is that all of his dialogue, in addition to showing up in the dialogue box, is voiced. You can skip it if you wish, but it all sounds like it's in the default male Dunmer voice. Some people said that they thought the voice was slightly different, but it was a very, very good imitation. I won't go into details, but the questline he sends you on has to do with the dungeon referred to simply as the Citadel. Up until this point, the quests are all of a fairly generic discover the secret of the Ancients bend. The entrance to this dungeon on a small island far to the west of Morrowind proper. I eventually discovered that if you use the scroll of Icarian Flight at the westmost point on the main landmass and jump directly west, you'd end up almost exactly at the island. Even though the dungeon is called the Citadel, it goes straight down. It dwarfs any other dungeon, both in size and difficulty. From a natural cave area, you'll proceed down into an ancestral tomb looking area, then a Daedric ruin area, then a Dwemer ruin area. I made it down to the Dwemer ruins before I quit. The creatures here were strong enough that a level 20 character would have to take care, and since you can't use the console in JVK, level 20 took a while to get to. Since quick save and quick load are your only options, it's too easy to get yourself into an impossible situation too. I did, and I just didn't have the energy to start over. Now what I'm telling you is based on what those few who went further reported. Past the Dwemer ruins, you find yourself in a level like the Dwemer ruins, but darker. Rather than the usual bronze, all surface areas, including those of the creatures, are black. The sounds of machinery are loud here, and grow louder still, randomly. There's also steam and fog everywhere, limiting your vision to about 10 in-game feet or so. If you can make it through all this, you will reach a hall that those who found it called the portrait room. Like the fire and torches or effects from early 3D games, this room has picture frames that always face directly at you, no matter how you look at them. The images in the frames are always randomly chosen images from your My Pictures folder. On the board, the ones who got there had some fun posting screenshots of the portrait room with various pictures in the frames, usually porn of course. At the end of the hall was a locked door. After admitting defeat and returning to Tierra's, everyone just found him saying, "Watch the sky," in his gravelly voice. What's more, nobody else in the game would say anything. There was just a completely blank dialogue box with no options at all. They wouldn't even rattle off the usual canned audible greetings. The only exception was at night. Whenever they'd go out for a few minutes, they'd still repeat it. "Watch the sky." At this point, one of the players, a friend of mine from the board, noticed, and a few others who got this far agreed, that the night sky was no longer the usual night sky of Tamriel. It had changed to a depiction of a real night sky, and it moved. From this point on, everything is based on what this one person reported. Eventually, he got himself kicked from the board, but I kept in contact with him for as long as he responded. According to him, based on the constellations and planets, the sky started around February 2005. If you died, loaded, or went back to the Citadel, it would start over. When the usual day sky graphics took over, the movement would be suspended until the stars appeared again. In the space of a single night, everything would move about 2 months worth. Since the timescale of JVK was more or less that of a standard game, that meant that a bit less than an hour was equal to a 24-hour period. He became convinced that the door would open based on some kind of celestial event. Of course, waiting for that meant leaving the game running. Of course, that meant that the game couldn't be left unattended, thanks to our old friend the assassin. My friend decided he'd hang out for a whole day, just to see if anything happened. That would be about a year's worth of movement. Here's the post he made at the end of his experiment. I loaded in Sadia Neen, where it all starts. It wasn't too bad, just had to check in now and then to move around and heal and make sure I wasn't dying. But check it out, 24 hours exactly in, and the assassin has learnt a new trick. He screams. I was reading, and all of a sudden this crazy loud shriek just about makes me crap myself. It's like something out of a horror movie. I look up and there he is, just crouched down right in front of me. Of course, the second I moved my character, he ran off. When I went back down to the portrait room, the door was still locked. Damn it. Damn it, damn it. A bit later, he came to the decision that he needed to wait 3 days, 3 years. The PM advising us to try DOSBox showed up every February of 2008 was his reasoning anyway. After the first streak, the assassin stops hitting you out of nowhere. Now he'll shriek, and if you don't move for a few seconds after that he hits you. I think whoever made the mod was trying to help. At night, I've got my headphones on and I was just kinda dozing off, when he wakes me up with a shriek. I jiggle the mouse and I'm good. That post was 2 days in from his laptop. Once it was over. Damn it, damn it, damn it! I'm so done. So I wait the 3 days, right? And right after the assassin made me jiggle my mouse, he shrieks again. So I look, and everyone in the town is outside.
They're all saying, "Watch the sky." I don't see anything though. But then the game starts getting dark, like really dark. I turned up the brightness all the way up on my monitor, and I can still barely see. I can see other people in the game, little figures running around in the distance, just running back and forth. If I try to get close, they run off. Now, I was trying to sleep, so the lights are off, and this is kind of creepy. I don't want to get up to turn on my light because I don't want to miss anything, but nothing happens. Eventually, I go back to the Citadel. It's still dark, and I gotta swim. And the whole time, I can see all these guys swimming all around me, just barely there. I make it to the Citadel, and it's normal light inside. And I get worried. Sure enough, the portrait door, it's still bloody closed. I go outside and it's all starting over. So that's it. I'm going to bed and I'm done. The end. After that, two things happened. First, another of the people who got to the portrait room claimed that the assassin was showing up in his regular Morrowind game. Quick explanation, if we reinstall Morrowind to a different folder, you could have a normal Morrowind installed along with JVK. He himself chalked it up to an overreactive imagination at first, but he reported a couple of really big scares with the black figure crawling right at him, or seeing it waiting for him just around the corner before scuttling off. Another of those who reached the portrait room started a regular Morrowind game, but never saw him for sure. It was just a couple of maybes, late at night and always at a distance. The second is that my friend started getting really abusive and short-tempered on the board, though he stopped talking about JVK entirely. It got so bad that he was soon kicked off. I didn't hear anything from him for a couple of weeks after that, so I sent him an email. This was part of his reply. I know I shouldn't, but with classes I've got some time, so I started JVK up again. It's almost 2011, and I think I've got the sleep madness. But stuff is happening. It's still dark. Once it gets dark, it never gets any lighter. It stays like that. The people moved a few months ago. Everyone in Seyda just went to that little bandit cave and moved in. They killed the bandits inside, and now they're just standing around inside. They don't say anything anymore. They don't do anything when you click on them. I quick-saved and killed one, and he just stood there until he died without fighting back. And it's like that everywhere. You have to walk since all the quick travel people are in caves now too, but all the cities and towns are just deserted. All the people are in caves and tombs. Everyone in Vivek is down in the sewers. I'm going to Ghostgate next. I want to see if Thierry's is still there. I'll tell you what he says when I get there. I replied, and I said I wanted to see what he said too. I waited a day. When I didn't get a reply, I mailed him again, and a couple of hours he sent back. Sorry, I totally forgot. So it's 2014 now. Since it's always night, the stars are always moving. The whole screen is dark, but you can still see the brightest stars moving around. Thierry's was gone. Everyone in Ghostgate was gone. I don't know where they went. They're not in any of the nearby caves. But there's new stuff. People still don't say anything, but their eyes are bleeding. It's so dark that even with a light spell, you have to get right up against them to see. But they are. Little dark streaks coming down from their eyes. I think I gotta be getting close. I know this is stupid, but there's no way the payoff's going to be worth it. But I just want to be able to say I stuck it out. I got that one during the day. Later that night I got a follow-up email. Some of the planets aren't moving right. It's annoying me. If this keeps up, I won't be able to track anymore. It's almost 2015 now, I think. Damn. You know, I just now noticed that there aren't any monsters anymore either. I'm completely alone outside now. The main quest's people bodies are still lying around though. I went to check on them. I didn't need headphones anymore, so I just leave them off. When he shrieks, it's like he's screaming right into my ear. I think I even kind of anticipate it. He's around a lot more now, a lot closer. He's different from the other people who started showing up. Remember? They keep running around, just where I can barely see them. I have to admit, it's kind of creepy at night. Sometimes when I go to the bathroom or wherever, I swear I can see something out the corner of my eye. I'm keeping all the lights on now. I sent him a letter, jokingly telling him to get some real sleep, and left it at that. 2 mornings later, I found this in my email. It was the last thing I got from him. After this, he stopped responding completely. I just got up from a messed up dream, I think. The assassin shrieked at me, and when I opened my eyes, he was right there, crouching over me. His arms and legs were longer, more like spiders. I tried to push him away, but when I touched him, my hands just went inside and I couldn't get them loose again, like he was made of tar or something. Then I woke up, I thought. He was gone, but when I looked at the monitor, I wasn't where I was. I was in the corpusarium with Yagram. For once, the light was okay, and I could see him all bloated on those mechanical spider legs. I sat down at the computer and he started talking to me. Not in a box, but really talking to me, in Tierra's voice. He knew things about me. He told me things that I never told anyone. Some things I totally forgot about. He told me that almost nobody had made it this far, and that the door would open soon. I just had to hang on a little while longer. He said I'd know when it was time. He said I might be the first one to see what was inside. And then I woke up for real, but I was at the computer. I still wasn't where I was. I'm swimming out to the Citadel Island, and I can hear this tapping. It's at my window. It's over on the left. So I'm sending you this because I left my laptop by my bed to the right. Just a little tap, 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 like he's knocking his finger against the glass. I might still be dreaming now. So, I guess that's the end of my story. I know there's a few other stories floating around about the mod, but this is the only one I know is true as far as it goes. I deleted my JVK copy of the game pretty much right after I gave up, but I'd like to get the mod again. If anyone still has a copy of the file, I'd like to see some of this for myself. Ruby, crimson, scarlet. The colour of fire, of passion, of anger, of pain. Red. How I love it. It was beautiful. The boldness, the warmth of the colour stirred something deep inside me. It whispered to the very core of my being. Dark, seductive, velvet promises of unrivaled pain and pleasure. It made me feel alive, but it was so rarely found, pure, untouched, red, its essence. I could only behold it in fleeting glimpses. It always vanished before I could really appreciate that loveliness. Blossoms wilted, makeup faded, and the garments of passers-by were never the right shade. I hungered for something deeper, richer than those glimpses of beauty. It was then that something occurred to me. The colour of fire, of passion, of anger, of pain. It was also the colour of blood. Once that idea took hold of me, you can be sure it did not relinquish its hold easily. Blood was everywhere, whole rivers of it pulsing through the veins of billions of people around me. I had enough to paint the whole bleak, dull world red. I cut up my first a year ago, I believe. I remember thinking her skin would make a wonderful canvas, smooth and pale, and it did. Skin is so boring, so neutral and flat, so I took her to a narrow, winding street that led to a dead end, offering to walk her home as it had gotten very late. And I reached into my pocket, closing my trembling fingers around the handle of the blade I had sharpened earlier that day. I painted her red that night, she and I both. I felt a strange rush of something akin to euphoria, dragging the sharp, gleaming steel across that soft, white surface and watched it come alive with red. I drew back and cut again, then again, in long sweeping curves. Back, torso, shoulders, hips, stomach, wrists, thighs. It was even better than I had imagined. Rich, flowing crimson poured out of every gash I made and splashed onto my hands, my knife, my clothes, the street. No one heard her screams, just as no one heard my delighted laughter as I sliced open her neck in one clean movement. Watched as the last lovely red poured out, warming and gushing into the street, into the dark, deserted street, as the last spark of light in her eyes went out. I stayed for a while, with a still warm corpse in my arms, relishing the fresh, glistening colour, smiling gently. I knew then that I would do this again, without the slightest hint of remorse. She had just been like everyone else, plain and unnoticed. I had made her beautiful. I had painted her red, every inch, the purest, brightest red I could find. It was a bit messy, but that was really to be expected for the first time. The next one would be a work of art. I don't understand. They'd made me stop. I was completing my masterpiece. 2 children, perhaps brother and sister. I planned to carve rosebuds in their skin. I had gotten quite good at making various designs and patterns, but they put binds on me, forced me into a flashing, wailing car, covered up my hard work with ugly patches of cotton, and asked me questions I did not understand. They called me awful things, a psychopath, a murderer, a lunatic. They took my knife away. I was only an artist, I tried to explain. My blade was my paintbrush. The world was my canvas. Its people my ink. I made them beautiful in death. If only they would let me show them. Let me cut them. They might see how lovely it was. But they did not. No one understood. They repeated themselves endlessly. Murder, homicide, mutilation, assault, kidnapping, killing. Ugly words, hateful words. They didn't listen. Did they want the world to be boring? Did they want to spend their lives in a monochromatic shadow of what I could have made it? Perhaps they did. They would not answer my questions. Would only throw more words at me. Senseless, awful words. I was not any of the things they called me. I was an artist. They were the cruel ones, calling me names and locking me away. I was not. But it's okay. Even though I was kept out of reach, even though I was placed in this shiny white, unreasonably clean metal box they call a hospital, even though they won't let me see anyone else. It's okay. because I don't need a knife to cut. I didn't need others to paint. I had gallons of red, pulsing and flowing in my veins. I had my teeth, my nails as brushes. The walls of the hospital room, clean and stark, would make a perfect backdrop. It was only a pity that I wouldn't be able to enjoy my last piece of artwork. This last splash of red. Myself. I'm sure you've all heard of the Ronald McDonald House charity. They provided housing for families of sick kids when they're in hospital. Seems pretty innocent, right? Well, there's another side to the charity. There's another type of Ronald McDonald House, one that not many people know about. There's one in most big cities. You won't find it by looking for it. It doesn't have an address. It doesn't have a sign above the door. It doesn't even have windows. No, the only way you'll find it is if you're taken there. That's how I found it. I've never met my real parents. I've been in and out of foster families and group homes here in Detroit since I was a kid. I'm 15 now, and I'm what they refer to as a bad kid. Always causing trouble. Always getting thrown out and placed with another unsuspecting do-gooder who thinks they can help me. I always prove them wrong. My caseworker sat across the black metal table, looking wary and frazzled. On the table between us was a thick letter-sized brown envelope. My case file. "Well, your reputation has preceded you," she said, "and now you only have two options. Military school in Lansing, or the Ronald McDonald House, which has miraculously cleared you for acceptance. I don't have the patience for drill sergeants and 5 AM reveille, and how bad could a halfway house named after a fast food clown possibly be? Ronald McDonald House it was." Dark clouds loomed over me the day I climbed into the back of my caseworker's town car, my few belongings in a backpack, and the clothes on my back. That's all I could take. One of the few belongings I had was a photo album, filled with pictures of all the foster families I had been with. It was nice to remember some of them, even though I had royally screwed it up each time. "I have had a few cases who went through Ronald McDonald House," the caseworker said in the front seat. "Things went so well for those kids, I never had to transfer them anywhere else. In fact, the house took over the case files and everything." We drove into downtown Detroit, past all familiar landmarks. I'd been thrown out of one foster home just outside town because I snuck into downtown Detroit with some neighbor kids to sneak into a dive bar. Good times. Well, here we are. The car came to a stop. I looked outside the window. We'd parked in front of a tall, grey, windowless building, sandwiched between two other industrial buildings on a narrow city street. I noticed there was an address on the building to my left, and one on the right, but none on this particular building. Not even a sign. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating as I opened the car door and climbed out of the back seat. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, clinging tightly to the strap, and followed the caseworker up to the windowless metal doors. She pressed the buzzer and spoke to someone inside, and the doors clicked to unlock. We walked in. As soon as the metal doors closed behind us, I noticed the pin-drop silence. It was that sort of silence that was so oppressive and empty it almost deafens you. Across the dimly lit lobby, there was a glass window with someone inside. A secretary. She was turned away, typing something intently. We walked over to the window. The caseworker rang a bell on the counter, and the secretary spun around in her chair. Her face was painted like a clown. Like Ronald McDonald, in fact. She even had the short, red curly hair. Otherwise, she wore a typical white nurse's dress. I wanted to laugh at how bizarre it was, but I couldn't. A chill swept down my spine. Something was not right. I watched as the nurse and my caseworker interacted. Paperwork was passed through the window. The caseworker slid my case file under the glass as the nurse slid her some papers to sign. As my caseworker signed the papers, the nurse looked at me. Her smile should have been warm and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. "I can't stay here," I stammered loudly. "Take me to the military school in Lansing, please." "What's the matter, sweetie?" the nurse asked, her voice muffled slightly by the glass. "Afraid of clowns?" I looked into her hungry eyes. Now there was a malicious glint as she laughed. My caseworker laughed too, obviously, and said, Now, don't overreact. You'd hate military school. Besides, this will be good for you." "Yes," said the clown nurse. "This will be good for you." Before I could object, I heard a slam behind me. I spun around to see an open door in the far corner of the lobby. To the left of the front desk window, there was no one there, just the light that flooded in from that door. Then, the creeping shadows. Shrill, echoing laughter and growing shadows along the wall inside the door. "Oh," said the caseworker, "here comes the welcome committee." As I stared in horror, clutching the strap of my backpack, my caseworker patted me on the shoulder for the last time. "Don't worry, honey. It'll be different this time. You'll feel right at home here, I promise." She turned to leave. I felt bile churning in my stomach. "No," I said desperately. "You can't leave me here." "Oh no, I've got to get going. I never did like clowns." And with that, she left me there. The metal doors slammed behind her, and I was alone. I faced the open doorway by the front desk again. The shadows had almost entered the room, and the piercing laughter was filling the lobby with sound. I ran for the front doors, pounded and yanked and pushed and screamed. Screamed for help, screamed for my caseworker, screamed for anyone, please God. I turned to see the nurse behind the glass smiling at me again. And then they entered, laughing all the while. A whole group of laughing nurses with clown faces and red hair, some male, some female, but all with the same terrifying Ronald McDonald makeup. And in the dim light of the lobby, I could see the glint of metal tools in their hands. Coming up the rear was a pair of clown nurses rolling a metal table, complete with restraints. "Get the hell away from me!" I screamed. I pounded at the metal doors again. "Let me out of here!" They surrounded me, grabbing me as I thrashed and screamed and tried to tear myself away, laughing as I kicked and squirmed. They slammed me onto the rolling table and strapped me down. I looked around wildly. I was surrounded. "Let me go!" I screamed, twisting and turning and pulling at the restraints. They rolled me through the open doorway and down the seemingly endless white hallway. They laughed and laughed and laughed. They waved their shiny scalpels and razors and needles mere inches from my face, just to make me flinch and scream. This made them laugh even harder. The last thing I remember before one of them finally injected me was the hands. Gloved fingers protruding inside my mouth and pulling at the sides of my mouth, distorting my screams and forcing an unnatural grin onto my tear-streaked, sweaty face. Hot, rancid breath in my face, and the whispered, perverted voice speaking the words, "We love to see you smile." Then, as the maniacal laughter seemed to warp and wind down like a dying record player. Everything faded to black. I opened my eyes, and I was blinded by bright lights above. Shielding my groggy eyes from the fluorescent bulbs, I turned on my side and looked around. A cell. Tall white walls, covered in scratch marks and stains. A small drain in the corner of the floor. My toilet, perhaps. A door with no windows, and on the floor by the door, my backpack. I tried to sit up. My body ached, and the moment I sat upright, my vision started spinning. Wonder what they drugged me with. I realized I was shivering. I looked down. I wasn't wearing my own clothes anymore. I was wearing a dirty, ripped hospital gown, bright yellow with a pattern of Ronald McDonald's head all over, nothing underneath. I heard faint, muffled sounds from somewhere in the building. It sounded like screams. I tried to stand but couldn't keep my balance. My vision was beginning to stabilize, but my body still felt like rubber. I sank to my knees and crawled over to my backpack. Before I got there, I tried to open the door. As expected, it was locked. I slumped onto the floor beside my backpack and unzipped it. All that remained inside was the photo album. They'd taken my notebooks and pens and my cell phone. Of course they did. I warily opened the photo album, but instead of the photos that had been in there, photos of myself with my previous foster families, photos where I had attempted to look happy and hopeful even though I knew I wouldn't be there for long. Instead of these photos, they were like crime scene photos, and in each one I recognized one of my foster families, brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart raced and my stomach churned. I began to turn the pages quicker, each page a new photo, a new family, new carnage. I recognized the faces and the inside of their homes. I had lived with all these people, and now they were all dead. I came to the last few pages. A photo of a house at night, then all the windows of the house, then inside the house, a dark hallway with light coming from one doorway, then a photo of my caseworker brushing her teeth at her bathroom mirror, then a photo of her looking at the camera in horror, then a photo of the caseworker, naked, covered in her own blood, contorted into an unnatural position in a bathtub. I turned to the last page. Written inside the back cover of the photo album were 3 words. You never existed. I felt bile rising in my stomach. I threw the book to the ground and crawled over to the hole in the floor and vomited. They were right. Having killed everyone who ever knew me, it was as though I never existed. I heard more faint screaming in the distance. I knew I had to get out. I wiped the vomit from my face with my hospital gown and crawled back over to my backpack. Hopefully, they hadn't found my secret weapon. I unzipped the front pocket and reached down into the very bottom, my fingers scraping the fabric. Sure enough, there they were, flush with the seams in the bag, nearly undetectable. The pins I used for picking locks. I told you, I'm a bad kid. I leaned against the door and listened. I could hear footsteps approaching, but just as soon as they come, they faded in the other direction. I knew I had to work fast. I jiggled the handle with one hand and picked the lock with the other hand. It was surprisingly simple. Holding the handle, I slowly pulled myself to my feet. I could maintain my balance now. I pulled the door open just a crack. A clown nurse darted past, My heart almost stopped, but his footsteps didn't slow or change and soon faded. He didn't notice me. I poked my head around the door, seemingly endless white hallways in either direction. The distant screams grew louder now, coming from all around. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I decided to go to the right. Passing doors identical to the door I'd been in, I heard the screams and sobbing coming behind each one. I stopped for a moment at one door. I heard the crying of a child inside. I jiggled the handle to see if I could let him out. Locked. I kept moving, looking behind me every few seconds to make sure no nurses had come to the hallway. Then I passed a set of white double doors. I stopped for a moment. The word "play place" was written in tall, thin letters across the width of both doors. I heard more screaming coming from within, the screams of multiple people, and laughter. The insane, shrill laughter of the clown nurses. I shuddered. I was afraid to find out what sort of torture was happening inside, and I knew I had to keep moving. I saw a door ahead with a stairway symbol. I headed for it. As I opened the door, I glanced behind me and saw two clown nurses emerging from the play place room. Their white nurse outfits were covered in streaks of blood. I quickly shut myself into the stairwell, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairwell was dimly lit, with cement walls and rusting railings. I looked behind the door I had just closed. There was a red number 5 on the door, so it must have been the 5th floor. I decided I had to get to ground level. Each footstep echoed as I began to descend the stairs. I couldn't hear the screaming anymore, just a low, deep humming sound like pipes in the walls. It was a welcome respite. I finally came to the door numbered 1. The staircase seemed to descend a few floors lower, but I stopped here and slowly peeked through the door. More white hallways. No clown nurses to be seen. So far, so good. I stepped through the door and walked into the hallway. I noticed I couldn't hear any screaming on this floor, just the buzz of the fluorescent tube lights above. I came to the end of the hallway and another set of double doors. A large red cross, the kind you'd see on a lifeguard stand or at a first aid kit, was painted across the width of the doors. I pressed my ear against the door. All I heard was a slow, rhythmic pulse like a machine at work, and faintly, a beeping sound, like you'd hear in a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't open the door. I knew this wasn't the exit. I knew I should keep looking, but I had to see. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. I peeked inside. It was a cavernous white room. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. I saw wires hanging all around, and hanging from the ceiling in rows. Kids in hospital gowns like mine, attached to white wooden crosses affixed to the ceiling, literally crucified. They were silent, their heads drooping forward, their eyes either closed or staring at nothing. Some seemed to twitch a bit, but most were still. The crosses swung back and forth very slightly. And the hanging wires, they weren't wires. They were intravenous tubes attached to the kids' wrists. Tubes sucking out their blood. I almost vomited again right then and there. In the very centre of the room, amidst the row of hanging crosses, I could see where the rhythmic pulsing sound came from. A huge steel cylinder, which seemed to be collecting all the blood from all the tangled tubes that dangled from the kids' wrists. I opened my mouth to scream, to cry out in anger. All I could say was, "What the hell?" That's when the alarms began to sound, loud, piercing like police sirens of hell. They must have realised I was missing. I shut the doors and frantically glanced around the hallway to see if anyone was coming. No signs yet. I ran for the stairwell. As soon as I entered the stairwell, I heard laughter coming from above, echoing and reverberating throughout the stairwell. The clown nurses were coming. I stumbled down the stairs as fast as I could. I must have gotten down another 3 stories before I reached the basement. I found myself running through a dark, sewer-like hallway with small light bulbs overhead every 10 yards or so. The smell of decay and rotting flesh grew more and more pungent as I ran. The laughter continued behind me. I managed to glance behind and see a group of them running after me. I saw them come into the light and then become silhouettes again. Their smiling faces and gleaming knives and needles pushing my adrenaline to the max. I ran past alcoves full of stacked, rotting corpses. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't think of anything but escape. I turned a corner and found myself facing the metal rungs of a ladder in the wall. I climbed until my head smacked against the ceiling. Below me, the shadows of laughter grew closer. Their footsteps slowed. They were close, and they knew it. I pushed the ceiling above me, heaving upward and panting and screaming. The clowns were below me, laughing and waving their scalpels. Something cut my leg. I screamed and pushed one last time. The ceiling gave way as a manhole cover slammed into asphalt above me. A circular opening. I climbed out and frantically pushed the manhole cover back over the hole, blocking out the laughter and the clown nurses below. I laid there, on top of the manhole cover for a few minutes as I caught my breath. Rain fell onto my skin. The turbulent sky above was a welcoming sight. I looked around. Abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no cars, no signs of any life at all. A police siren somewhere in the distance, then silence. An urban ghost town. I climbed to my feet. Pain shot through my leg. I looked down and saw the cut on my ankle where a nurse clown had slashed me. Limping the best I could, I started to walk. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody! Help me, please!" My foot fell on something soft and mushy. I looked down. A newspaper. I peeled it off the wet asphalt. Most of the ink had faded, but I was able to make out the date. July 13th, 1992. I dropped it, an icy dread filling my stomach. I kept walking. "Can anyone hear me?" I screamed. "Please! Anyone! Please!" My words faded into delirious sobs. I stood still for a moment. The rain had soaked through my thin hospital gown. I shivered as the wind blew. Then I saw a light in the distance. It was a big, yellow M in the sky. A McDonald's. Of course. I limped towards it. When I came to the McDonald's, I saw that, apart from the M, the rest of the building was completely dark. I walked cautiously toward the broken windows and looked inside. Darkness. I turned and surveyed the play place outdoor playground. 10-foot-tall structures of coloured tubes for kids to crawl through. Sitting at one of the benches was a familiar figure. The Ronald McDonald statue. You know, the one where you could sit beside him, and it looks like he's got his arm around your shoulders. Every kid has seen it. I shuddered at the sight. The doors were unlocked. I walked in, out of the rain. Silence. Darkness. I noticed that the decor wasn't like the modern McDonald's you see. It was the same as it was in the 80s, with the white plastic booths and red and yellow tiles. The wind seemed to whisper through the broken windows. I noticed something on the front counter. A black rectangle. I got closer. A laptop. A nearly new laptop. I let out a soft, delirious laugh. I knew what I was supposed to do. I took the laptop outside and sat beside the Ronald statue. I opened the laptop and began to record this story. The rain is falling on the keys, but I don't care. There's nothing left to do now but wait. Because I've been noticing, at the corner of my eye, Ronald is trying to look over my shoulder. He's laughing now. All I can do is join him.